recommendations for curriculum materials and instructional materials for middle school English language arts, elementary mathematics, and middle school mathematics. It's important for all of us to understand what we're bringing forward today and what we're not bringing forward today. What we're recommending are instructional materials, curricular materials, and they're an important tool for teaching and learning. They're foundational. They're absolutely essential. They are not, however, a panacea for student learning, because good materials are essential. They're necessary, but they're not sufficient. We must also have strong instructional practice that is effective and that is individual and intentional for every single student, and that's what is required. So it's a giant step, I think, forward for the system as we look at an update. The last curriculum was adopted in 2010, I believe. And so now as we sit here in January 2019, this is a critical moment for us. It's particularly important that we understand that having the right materials, and as we heard in public comment today, both digital and hard copy materials are critical and essential. I know I sit here with a notebook. Some of my colleagues sit here with a computer. We all have our ways of learning, and we all need to learn all of the different ways that we can learn, but we also have preferences and strengths, and we've got to pay attention to that. Part of that is also making sure that the adults across 206 schools and across Carver understand how to best support learning through professional learning of adults, and this will be a critical part. One of the things that I want to be very clear about today is this is not an event, and there is no end to this process. We will work from this point on, and you'll hear a lot about what's happened in the last months and a couple of years, but it's not like we're going to be finished with this in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or 24 months. We should constantly be evolving, refining, paying close attention to this. These materials are also not new standards. The standards are clear. The Maryland College and Career Ready standards were adopted by the State Board in 2010. And if indeed we can help all children and adolescents reach those standards or exceed them, then we will be in a very good place in our community and our society. So we're bringing forth materials that will serve a vast majority of our students. That does not mean we will not need to supplement, adjust, pay attention, monitor, change for individual students. It's critically important that we do those things. I always say all means all, and one of the things I like to share is that, I had someone say to me recently, that's kind of cliche, we've heard that so much. The reason we hear cliches is because they're true. All means all is true. And I don't mind that it's a cliche. I like that people say it, because it ought to be at the front of our mind and our conscience and our consciousness and our moral urgency all the time. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Navarro and her team, Ms. Hazel and Mr. Murphy, to talk about where we are and where we think we need to go next. So Dr. Navarro.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. So good afternoon, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to come forward at the end of an interesting trajectory, bringing forward to you finalists for curricular materials. But it actually is, as much as work has gone into this process, it's just the beginning, as Dr. Smith said. I want to remind that today's discussion will center on providing an overview for our background. The board is engaged in cycles of review, and part of its policy is to review and adopt, revise curriculum. And so we are in that cyclical period, and we should do that as a strong school district. We need to be continuously engaging in how to provide our students with the best instructional materials in multiple modalities in front of them at all times for every single one of our students. And so I think this is the process, the correct process that we're engaged in. We are coming to you with finalists for elementary mathematics, middle school mathematics, and middle school English language arts materials. And we will be coming forward with the elementary literacy ELA curriculum finalists for you in February. There's a lot of materials to cover, and I know that both Nikki and Scott are here to give you all the details, but I just wanted to frame it. We will first talk a little bit about the background and the selection process, and allow some questions to move forward about the engagement of individuals and the community in that process, and then we'll go into details about the finalists, why the specific finalists are coming over. So I just wanted to let everybody know that we'll sort of do a mid-pause for questions, and then and we're happy to answer questions also if there are any in between then, but we thought that would be a good way to break up the presentation. I just wanted to So I just wanted to just quickly give you a framing of the process that we followed, beginning obviously with the external audit that we did with Johns Hopkins University, and the process that we went through for issuing a comprehensive RFP process. You'll hear a lot about who was part of each of these phases, specifically the evaluation and the selection, and bringing forward finalists for the community to take a look at who the finalists were and hear from the finalists, and also go online and see presentations from the finalists so that we could bring forward with you multiple perspectives and engagements and points of view and perspectives on the best instructional materials for all of our students. And I just want to take a couple of minutes to highlight and actually put up on the screen the folks that were part of what we call the core team. And I just wanted to put, even though it's small print, it will be on record, each individual member that made up the core team. And those are the people that I saw with boxes of binders going home after either teaching, leading schools, having meetings here at Carver because they supervise programs or are directors of programs, and going home and just for the fun of it, staying up until midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, reading materials after materials of the many folks that submitted instructional materials for us to look at, going on their laptops and reading this. We had a holding school that we took over during this time because we had so many materials. We had several classrooms filled with materials, and the core team members were there on weekends and evenings. We had to man those centers for several weekends so that they had enough time to provide feedback. And they are an exceptional representation of the quality of staff that we have in MCPS. I keep getting questions about things they're thinking about, the way they want to engage in the work moving forward. And I am just very proud to have work alongside these individuals because they're exceptional individuals who had amazing conversations about how to best meet the needs of all of our students. So I just wanted to put them out there so that on the record, everybody knows the wide range of schools and offices that participated across the district and the amount of hours that these folks took to do this work. So I just wanted to publicly thank them. And then we can get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. So with that, I think I'm passing it over to Ms. Hazel.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Want to just begin by starting periodically when we go out into communities, we still get the questions from parents about why we need new curriculum, why we are going through this process. And so just want to remind our communities that by board policy, every 5 years, we do revisit our curriculum, make sure that we are in alignment with the research and best practices. And so last school year, we did take part in an audit process with Johns Hopkins Institute. They did a 3-part audit process looking at our written curriculum. They also went into classrooms to observe the taught curriculum and then took a look at our student data as well. And they had a number of findings, both positive and also some findings that they asked us to revisit and take a look at in terms of strengthening our curriculum. So I'm not going to read the list to you, but for mathematics and for literacy, a common theme that we heard in both was a stronger alignment to the Common Core standards. And then in mathematics, as we take a deeper look, they really wanted us to provide more opportunities for our students to build that conceptual understanding in mathematics and then have the practice they needed for those procedural skills. In literacy, again, that alignment to the Common Core, but also we found, and we heard frequently from our auditors, the need to have more explicit instruction with our foundational skills. That is our phonemic awareness, our decoding, all of those skills that our early learners need to be able to be strong readers. And I think we've also heard some public comments about that this morning. So it's very much an alignment with what we're hearing from many of our parents in the community as well. Also, at the elementary and secondary level, more complex text, giving all of our students an opportunity to read text at grade level or higher, and then really making sure that our students have opportunities to respond to questions where they have to cite evidence from the text. And they want us to include more of that into our curriculum. So the overall recommendation from the audit was that we are now at a place where we can be looking at external instructional materials. When we started in 2010 with Curriculum 2.0, as Dr. Smith mentioned, Common Core State Standards had just come out, and there weren't a lot of external products available, but now there are high-quality external products that are available for us to consider in literacy and mathematics. Their recommendation was that we implement new instructional materials over a 3-year period, and that we also have an extensive professional development plan. So in addition to keeping in mind the feedback from the audit, we also wanted to make sure that we were keeping in mind the unique needs of the students in Montgomery County. We are a diverse school system, racially, culturally, and we also have a large number of students who are learning English as a second language. We have students who have special needs, and also students who are highly able or identified gifted, and so we needed to keep that in mind. And so as we wrote our request for proposal, we wrote seeking instructional materials that met the needs of that student group. In addition to that, thinking about our interventions and supports, we were looking for materials that provided teachers with some explicit direction around how to provide intervention. As we've heard from our parents, we also wanted to make sure that we had a balance of digital and print. So that we can ensure that our students are able to take home materials for our families, in addition to being able to access materials online. And then we wanted to ensure that the assessments were there, valid and reliable, and very much aligned to the lessons that students were receiving in class. In addition to that, we wanted to ensure that materials that we received were culturally responsive. And so we wanted to make sure that our students could see themselves in the materials. We wanted to make sure that the materials were free from bias and stereotypes. And so we wrote extensively in the request for proposal about making sure that the materials met this need as well. We heard a lot from our parents that unlike with Curriculum 2.0, they wanted more access to materials. They wanted to be able to see the curriculum. They wanted their children to be able to bring home materials that they were learning. And so this was another component of the request that we submitted. And then finally, in addition to our audit report and what we felt was needed in the RFP, we also went out to the community. We had on our MCPS website an opportunity for the community to share with us what they wanted to see in curriculum. And so we had that online engagement, and we were able to take into consideration a lot of the community feedback. So one of the things that I think is really important to understand when you think about what the audit said, when you think about all of the components that we considered with our unique student body and our community, that's a tall order. And we want to remind everyone that there is no such thing as a perfect curriculum, but we really want to find a product, and we're looking to find a product that met the needs of most of our students. And as Dr. Smith said, that we would be able to supplement where needed any areas that we felt weren't thoroughly addressed in the RFP process. So Mr. Murphy will talk a little bit about how we address some of that a little later, but I'll hand it to him for the process.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Now that you have some background on what got us to the release of the RFP in August, I want to walk you through the extensive evaluation and selection process that took place in the fall that brought forward finalists to vendor interviews and presentations and is getting us here to the final recommendations today. Over that time, we've been engaged in a really thorough process with lots of the people you saw flashed on the screen earlier that began with pre-vetting of proposals that came in, the extensive evaluation of the proposals by our core team and smaller teams that I'll explain in just a minute, vendor presentations, presentations that were online for the public, interviews, references, and again, bringing forward our recommendations today. When the proposals came in late September, the first thing that happened, there were 15 proposals in mathematics, 19 proposals in English language arts. The first thing that we did with an internal team was a basic review, a technical review, that the proposal met the basic requirements of what was outlined in the RFP. And secondly, that the proposal had an external evaluation that was done by a third party. The standard across the country for external evaluations is known as Ed reports, which is one of the most common. It's sort of the consumer reports of evaluating instruction materials, if you will. And so one of our requirements was that the materials had an external evaluation either by Ed reports or another comparable evaluation. Some proposals were eliminated in this part of the process based on the basic review, just meeting the basic requirements of the RFP, or because there was no external evaluation, or because the evaluation was not up to par. After the technical review, the proposals moved forward to the evaluation core teams that you heard Dr. Navarro mention earlier. And again, we want to thank the 55 people in math, the 60 people in English language arts, the majority of whom were school-based teachers and administrators, ESOL and special education staff, teacher leaders in our schools, our specialists here in the central office, our special education and ESOL staff here in the central office, who really did the heavy lift in this process in October and into November. These people, these large groups, we began with 2 days of training where they were oriented to the requirements in the RFP. We had some practice with the rubric that we were using, and then the groups were broken up into smaller teams, so that smaller teams by grade band, so that elementary experts were reviewing elementary materials and middle school experts were reviewing middle school materials. Following 2 days of training, these 155 people were then set loose for hours and hours of independent review. That reading, the going online, the reading materials, getting lots of emails and reminders from us as we walked them through the process. And again, a thank you to all those people. What they had was a pretty extensive rubric as they were evaluating the materials. The rubric was broken down into subcategories that get at the student and teacher experiences, the balance of digital and print, the differentiation that's needed for all learners, the cultural relevance, and some additional requirements. So they were rating within those categories, and they also provided a summative rating at the end of the process. Again, we estimate that each individual spent over 8 to 12 hours just independently reviewing materials. That doesn't count the 2 days of training. That doesn't count the time they came together as a group to practice using the rubric, and some other time that they spent in meetings with us. They did have a midpoint check-in as a group where we kind of normed the practices with using the rubric, and then they went off on their own to eventually submit an independent rating of the materials that they evaluated. So here's what it looks like after through that process, from the pre-vetting to the core team to identifying some finalists. In mathematics, 15 proposals were submitted. 8 were eliminated at that first process just based on the basic review and the external evaluations, and then 7 proposals moved forward to the core team. Following the core team evaluation, again, the hours and hours that those folks spent, 5 then moved forward in math for vendor presentations and interviews. In English Language Arts, 19 proposals were submitted, 10 were eliminated at that first pre-vetting process, 9 were reviewed by our core teams, and similarly, 5 moved forward as finalists in the process. Once they moved forward as finalists in the process, the publishers, the vendors were notified that they were a finalist and were provided with an opportunity to present to a large group. We had 1 full day for mathematics and 1 full day for ELA, and we had over 130 participants on each one of those days. Again, we had teachers, administrators, teacher leaders, our specialists in the central office, parents and parent groups, community representatives, and we also had middle and high school students and 1 elementary student present for the presentations. Each publisher was provided with 1 hour to present to the group what their materials would look like in full implementation, and they also answered questions from the audience. Each participant in the vendor presentation submitted an independent evaluation of what they heard that day to give us their overall impressions of what they heard, what they saw, to give us additional data to consider as we move forward. That day, each day, 1 full day, each day began with an orientation of all the participants so they knew what they were to be looking for, and then went through a long day of hearing from each proposal and evaluating at the end. For the finalists, they also, in addition to the presentations for that group, each finalist also provided us with an electronic presentation that was posted on the website, and all similarly evaluated the student and parent and teacher experience and some other aspects of the materials. We had a few hundred people view the materials online and several dozen who actually went through the process of completing a survey online to give us additional feedback from the public on the materials that they were able to see online. During the week of the vendor presentations, we also had a day-long interview with each of the publishers. Each of the vendors came and joined us here in the central office for a full day, and were broken up into 3 interviews that lasted about 1 to 2 hours each. One was a curriculum interview when we talked more in detail about the materials, about professional development, about implementation. A technical team who went deeper into some of the technical capabilities that were required in the RFP, and a legal team who began to go through our general contracting articles and some other legal requirements that we had in the RFP. This also gave us a chance to really ask in-depth questions of each of the finalists, and also address questions that kind of popped up throughout the process. From the core team to the vendor presentations, we were able to have more in-depth Q&A with the vendors through that interview process. We also contacted other districts. At least 2 references were collected for each of these. Large districts, we talked to large districts about the overall ratings and recommendations, these other criteria that you see here. And we also talked to districts who had very similar demographics as ours, with a similarly diverse student population and a population of English language learners. So the references really gave us additional insight about what they learned, about customer service, about the importance of professional development as we implement. As Ms. Hazel mentioned, there is no perfect curriculum that you just hand teachers a box and here you go. The importance of professional learning and the real strategic nature of the implementation plan is something not only that we talked about throughout the process, but also heard from other districts about the importance of. Before we close this section, I also want to thank not only the hundreds of people who were involved in the core team, but colleagues here in the central office who were working behind the scenes to coordinate all of this. As you can imagine, the truckloads of materials, the facility that Dr. Navarro mentioned, the coordination of hundreds of people, these events, lots and lots of people involved behind the scenes, many here in the audience that we want to thank for all of their work in coordinating all of this, which has just been critical to the process. So before we actually get into the materials and our recommendations, we'd just like to take a pause and have some discussion, answer any questions about the process.
So I don't see any lights. Do we, Dr. Docker, did you have a question that you wanted to?
Yeah, I have questions or comments, but I wanted to thank Ms. Simonson for being one of the parent representatives who worked on curriculum. I didn't mention that when we were talking about her before. And thank Dr. Navarro and Dr. Statham for helping to choose the people who were going to be reviewing. I was looking at the materials that were supplementary materials, reference materials for our teachers, and I didn't bring the list. I apologize. But I do remember that Glenn Singleton and Pedro Noguera were mentioned in these materials. We had Glenn Singleton come here, as we did Pedro Noguera. They were able to work with administrators and people who work in Carver and other support persons. But I remember Glenn Singleton saying, "I will not come back unless you name someone who is going to be in charge of cultural diversity in the curriculum and in the school." So I'm really happy to say that we have Dr. Smith. I'm sure Mr. Singleton, Dr. Singleton, I'm not sure whether Mr. Singleton would be really happy that we have someone who does say all means all and keeps us thinking about how to reach the needs of all of our students that are here. And I don't know whether you want me to talk about my observation of the materials at all, or is it?
Yes.
The math materials, okay, I paid a lot of attention to the math
Not
materials.
after the next discussion,
you
after the
say
next
no?
discussion. Yeah, not just yet.
Oh, process.
Okay.
Okay, the other piece of the process is this.
Whatever you want.
I'm sorry. The process in terms of the persons that we chose to review, and I mentioned this to us when we were talking before, people who are successful working with our target students, they needed to be a part of this. And I know as a principal, we like to send our best representatives, the ones who really know everything about everything. But we need the people who really work with these children and who are successful to be able to chime in on this, on the curriculum. So please keep that in mind, even though you've had lots of staff already working on it.
Thank you. Dr. Daka? Ms. Silvestri, do you have any comments? Ms. Wolf? Ms. Tataconda?
Yes, so a couple of items. I really liked that up front you all looked at the culturally responsive piece, because I know students have been especially particular about this being one aspect they want to see emphasized in the future, particularly high school students, but honestly I think it's something that we need to integrate into what we teach from a young age. So I was very happy to see that that was a key factor that was taken into consideration. So thank you for listening to us and doing that. And I also just wanted to take a moment to appreciate that students were included in the vendor presentation process, because I think that I feel like if students feel more like they were part of the process, selecting what comes to them for them to learn every day, they will be a lot more successful. So it's kind of a two-way street, because it allows us to know which particular option resonates with students most, but it also allows them to have that sense of belonging, to feel like they had a say in their education. So definitely after today, once we have some things finalized and solidified more so, I'll definitely be communicating with students more than the elementary schoolers, middle schoolers, that their representatives in various avenues were included in this process, because I think that'll make them feel a lot better and very happy. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dixon?
Yes, I just wanted to commend Dr. Navarro and Ms. Hazel and Mr. Murphy just for your leadership through this whole process. I think that, the organization and the foundation that you put in place for the selection really has turned up very, very excellent materials. And so I'll have some other comments just about some of the materials at the next discussion point. But just to thank you for that. It really is, I'm very proud of you guys. Thank you.
Ms. Mondowski?
Yep, so thank you. I will associate myself with the comments of Ms. Dixon and Ms. Tataconda, actually. You all should absolutely be very commended for the work that you've put into this and the integrity that I feel has been shown in this process, and the participation. It's in my many, many, many years of working with and advocating to MCPS, there's always been a concern about what kind of participation we get. Even though we put feelers out, we don't always ensure that we get a large sampling back sometimes. So one of the things that was really important to me was ensuring that we had significant staff input. And looking through the list, it looks like, we really did make a strong effort to make sure that as many voices and perspectives were included as possible. So I'm really grateful for that. One thing that I was concerned about when I was reading through the materials initially was it listed as part of the overall requirement, with student materials, teacher materials, assessments, digital media, differentiated instruction, culturally responsive, and additional requirements, which I thought was great. But I was concerned about parent resource materials and making sure that they're not just available, but they have these instructions that make it easy for parents to understand when they're going online and haven't done math in however many years. I'd be embarrassed to admit, but it sounds like that may be coming, and I'm really appreciative that you included that in there. I too want to thank, I know I did earlier, but thank MCCPTA and everyone for participating and giving their feedback. And I said it before, but I really do hope that we will take that testimony to heart. They're talking now about the process of how we got to right here, but I think when I was talking to Dr. Navarro about the materials that might be, that you all were looking at, for me I'm not an educational expert. So I put my faith in the work that you all do and that our staff has done. But it is about the process going forward from here and how we roll this out. And I know you all know, and we've all said, but we can have the best curriculum ever, but if we haven't provided our staff and our educators the opportunity to learn how to implement it appropriately, it's not going to do us that much good. So thank you very much for all of your work. I really appreciate it. This has not been an easy task, but it's very important, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mondrowski. Ms. O'Neill.
Well, yes, I too want to thank staff, the three of you, Dr. Navarro, Ms. Hazel, and Mr. Murphy, for setting forth on a transparent, fair, inclusive process so that it leads us to the board raising their hands ultimately in support of the contract on the new curriculum. I can't tell you how thrilled I am that so many people were involved, and I really thank them from the bottom of my heart for taking it so seriously and really rolling up their sleeves and devoting the time, so that I have a confidence that we will be adopting curriculum that supports the recommendations that came forward in the Johns Hopkins evaluations and things that over the years with Curriculum 2.0 we knew were lacking. The balance of paper versus digital, supports for instructional supports for our teachers to develop lessons, and resources for parents. I mean, that we've heard it over and over again from the parent community. So I know there was a lot of hard work to make this a really fair and transparent process. I mean, I know there'll be some who'll always second guess, but I think that we really cast a wide net to get feedback. So thank you.
I don't know that I can say it any different. Definitely do appreciate all the work. As was mentioned, the broad community stakeholder input was very key. Parent materials, and just even knowing that we had the vendors come in and talk to our staff. The technical piece, just making certain that the curriculum, in the event that we would use it, could talk to our systems, that we would be able to work with it, was very key. So just really appreciative for all the work, and looking forward to more of the discussion. So without further ado, you can continue.
Okay, and before we continue, I do want to acknowledge the students that participated. They were amazing and asked the most thoughtful questions. So they were a huge part of the vendor presentation process. And again, I can't reiterate what Mr. Murphy said about all of the folks who are sitting here in the audience who were a huge part of making this a successful process. So thank you all very much. We represent our departments, but they really were the ones that did the heavy lifting and worked with all of the hundreds of people on the core team and the parent community. So thank you so much. So we're going to move on now to talking about products or the instructional materials. And I'm going to start with mathematics. I want to share before we move into actually naming the instructional materials, just kind of share a little concept with you for mathematics at the elementary and secondary level. We are bringing forward today 2 instructional materials that are related to what is called open educational resources, or OER, and these are resources that can be found online and free. They are high-quality instructional resources that many who have created them because they believe that all children should have access to high-quality instructional materials, and they provide these materials online. There are publishers that take those resources and package and publish them into a curriculum product or a set of instructional materials. And so so what we're going to be presenting today and recommending today is purchasing instructional materials that come from open educational resources. And so some may ask the question, why would we pay for resources that are online and available? And so just want to talk that through a little bit. The 2 products that we want to recommend today, we are recommending the purchase of those products because they already come organized, bound and packaged for teachers to use. We think that it's more effective to do that than sending it to our printing and graphics shop and asking them to print thousands and thousands of materials for not only students but then for teachers as well. So the materials that we are looking to purchase would be the student materials, any home resources, and the assessments that go along with it. And so these assessments would also be compatible to our online platform. So we think it's more effective to be able to look at a resource in this way. So at the elementary level, we are bringing to recommendation an instructional resource called Eureka Math. Many people may be familiar with Engage New York. Engage New York is the online resource, and many of our teachers use Engage New York to supplement their the curriculum currently. But Eureka Math has been very much strongly rated in ed reports. It had the highest rating from our core team and very strong ratings from the interviews that we did, also from presentations, and had strong references. Many of the strengths of the Eureka Math product, really we felt that it was a comprehensive curriculum, very much aligned to the Common Core state standards. It definitely had high levels of rigor. We felt that it met the needs of most of the students in the district. The references were so excited to talk to us about the product and the growth that their students are making in the districts that they're in. So we were really excited about hearing how students are moving with their resource. And they also talked to us about the high quality professional development that is available through the Eureka vendors. And so we are really excited about using this, recommending this resource. You can see here, these are just some of the comments that teachers made as either they were looking at the product through the core team or through the vendor presentations. Really just a strong commitment to professional development. They felt it was very well laid out and had a lot of rigor. Something else that was really appealing to us with Eureka Math is that it also is available in Spanish for our immersion schools and also for our parent community. That will be something that we can share with families. But because Eureka Math is connected to Engage New York, it also is available. Engage New York offers the product in over 22 languages. And so then we would be able to serve all of our immersion schools right away with mathematics. And that was something that was also very encouraging to us. So I'm going to hand it over to secondary.
So for middle school mathematics, we are recommending a curriculum known as Illustrative Mathematics, published by LearnZillion. Illustrative Mathematics, as Nikki mentioned earlier, is also an open educational resource, or OER. We actually had 2 proposals that came in that were based on the Illustrative Mathematics curriculum. This is now the highest rated middle school curriculum on EdReports, and is really taking hold in other large districts across the country. It was among the highest by the core team, the highest in the interviews, a high rating in the presentations, and talking to other large districts about the Illustrative Mathematics curriculum verified the other data sources that we had been collecting. With LearnZillion, it also comes, as Mrs. Hazel mentioned, packaged for us in a way that is user-friendly and intuitive for teachers. Not only a full technology infrastructure and platform, but also hardbound materials, books that will actually come home as students work through units. So again, this balance of digital and print materials. The other thing about a platform such as this is it's really going to help provide teachers with in-the-moment support for meeting the needs of students who may be struggling, meeting the needs of English language learners, other students who may be struggling. Every single lesson comes with scaffolds and supports and just-in-time guidance for teachers about how to use it. Some other things that stand out about Illustrative Mathematics and LearnZillion, again, it's the highest rated curriculum on EdReports. The way that it supports teachers in their understanding not only of the strategies but also of the mathematics content is really, really strong. And the way it produces a classroom that is not teacher-directed and the teacher standing in front of the room solving the problems, but an actually student-focused classroom that produces that what we call productive struggle to help students master the conceptual understanding of mathematics. Again, the way it builds in scaffolds and supports for all of our learners, and very explicit methods for teachers provided in each and every lesson. Our reviewers also talked about how much it developed student reasoning and allowed for a classroom that was student-focused around students talking about the math, not just the teacher talking about the math. Some things that teachers had to say, or our core team had to say about Illustrative Mathematics and LearnZillion, a lot about the resources, a lot about how it supports a variety of learners and how it provides those supports, and the philosophy of the approach with mathematics and how it helps students, again, this balance of learning the procedures of math, but the deep conceptual understanding that's built over time stood out in this curriculum. One thing that we do need to talk about in our recommendation for mathematics curriculum K-8 is our accelerated pathways in MCPS. As you know, the vast majority of our students successfully complete algebra by the end of grade 8. And when we say successfully complete, we not only mean the course, but we mean meeting the graduation requirements by passing the PARCC tests, which I think you've heard Dr. Smith talk before. It's no joke, the standards and the rigor that's required. But our students are successful, and we're seeing more and more of them each year. And so it's really important for us as a district to maintain this pathway for our students. The Common Core sequence typically has algebra occurring in grade 9. But we will be working with Illustrative Math and with LearnZillion to maintain our pathway to grade 8 algebra. And customize the materials for us, customize the materials so that through the middle school pathway, the pathway to algebra in grade 8 remains strong here in MCPS. We will take about the next year to do that. We'll talk a little bit about the implementation plan, which will begin with grade 6. But by the time we're ready for implementation in algebra, we will have worked on the scope and sequence with our new partners to again develop that pathway into algebra. We also have some students who are successfully completing algebra in grade 7, which for many of them means taking math 4-5 and math 5-6 in elementary school. So we're going to spend the next year also studying those materials studying the new materials to determine the best path forward for MCPS as it relates to that accelerated pathway. In the meantime, for the next year, in the fall of 2019-20, our accelerated pathways, Math 4-5, Math 5-6, our investigations in mathematics curriculum, and our path to algebra in grade 7 will continue as our teachers and students have known it in MCPS. In middle school English language arts, our recommendation is a curriculum known as StudySync by McGraw-Hill Education. This also is among the highest ratings on EdReports and is used in other large districts across the country. And quite frankly, throughout the entire process that I described before, StudySync really rose to the top in every single one of those venues, from the core team highest rating to the highest ratings in our interviews to the highest ratings in the presentations, strong references from other districts. It's pretty clear from all of those data sources that these materials rose to the top from many, many people who looked at them. A little bit about StudySync. First is the multiple pathways that engage all of our learners, and I want to emphasize all. One of the fundamental things that will change with our middle school ELA curriculum is that this curriculum will serve as the core, as the foundation for all classrooms, and that includes ESOL. Historically, we've had a separate set of materials for our ESOL classes in middle school, and as we begin this transition, that will change. And these materials, this curriculum, this exposure to the units, this exposure to the anchor texts and the rigor of what will come with these materials will also be the foundation of ESOL instruction, which will obviously be scaffolded, and we will be providing teachers with companions for English language development, but the core, the foundation, will be the same for all of our ESOL students. Some of the other things that stood out about StudySync had to do with the extended writing and the way research is approached that's embedded in each of the units. High levels of relevance. So we see daily opportunities for students to connect what they're learning in English language arts to global issues that are happening right now, to understanding the world around them, and really creating high degrees of relevance for students as they are developing their literacy skills, learning how to write, learning how to communicate, learning how to use what they're reading to create an argument with evidence and do that coherently. And also the explicit differentiation that we see not only for students who may be struggling or need extra help, but also students who are ready for more. And these paths that are provided for teachers and students in the curriculum also provide explicit ways for teachers to enrich and take students further if they're ready for more. A few things that our core team or presentation members had to say about these materials. You'll see comments about the high levels of engagement, about some levels of personalization and choice. We even had a student who said, "I wish I had something like this earlier in my school career." And so that's a quote from a student who attended the vendor presentation that I think is a good summary of what we see in these materials. So we will take another pause there. We would like to end the presentation with talking about professional development and implementation. And what the next few months, what the next year will look like. But before we do that, we'll pause and take questions, comments about our recommended materials.
Sure. I don't see any lights, but we'll just go around the table. Dr. Daka, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, just a few things about the math materials. I noticed that one of the math books had Van Gogh work on the front. Van Gogh, I know, they said it's fine golf. On the front, that's it, yeah. And they connected that, at least, with what was going on in math. And in another one, they counted all the tulips that were painted. But I think it's important to connect that up with, interdisciplinary work, that it's not just math, but it should be connected. And I believe that's the one that had the instructions that parents could understand, and would have models for how the students could be helped to do that work. And you were just talking about Study Sync and how we're connecting that with global issues and STEM and civic engagement and environment. I think these are all very important things for us to look at. We need to do more of that, because so many times students say, well, I don't know why I need to know this if we don't connect it up. But I want to commend you for the kind of work that you and all of the staff have done, and all the people, 155 people, looking at the selections to begin with. It's quite a lot to manage, and we thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Silvestre. I wanted to ask about assessments. We want to ensure that the curriculum that we roll out is aligned with the multiple assessments that our students have to do. Could you speak a little bit about that? And then I have a second question as well.
Yes, so these materials all come with built-in assessments and assessment items. In some ways, though, they don't necessarily match exactly to how we assess currently. For example, quarterly assessments that feed our evidence of learning framework. So while we might have unit assessments in the materials, or we might have assessment items that are already written, we also want to match those assessments to how we currently measure student learning through multiple measures. So while there are assessments already written, already built, already tested, ready to go, we also have commitments from each of these publishers to work with us to ensure the assessment approach matches what we need to monitor student learning and improve instruction. We also will have technology infrastructure to help us administer assessments. And so particularly at the secondary level, these materials that we're recommending today have online assessments that give us real-time information about what students are learning and what they're not, so that teachers can respond immediately. You want to add anything?
And state assessments as well, the new state assessment, whatever that will be.
So these will all be fully aligned to the state assessments. Although the state assessments are changing, as Dr. Smith mentioned, the standards are not. So the curricular standards that are assessed are not changing, and these materials, as you can see from the external ratings, which are super high across the board, are fully aligned to what students will be measured on the state assessments.
And can you explain again what we're going to do to deal with the Algebra 1 issue? You explained it, but I wanted to make sure I'm processing it correctly.
So again, the Common Core state standards typically have Algebra 1 occurring in grade 9.
Right.
We have had a lot of success with our students successfully completing in grade 8. And what that has meant for us internally is a repackaging of standards, so that we basically have a course in middle school that covers 7th and 8th grade standards in 1 year, so that students can do algebra in middle school. We are going to be working with our new partners to examine, is that the best way to do it with these new materials, or is there a better way to do it with these new materials to ensure that that end game, the milestone of 8th grade algebra, remains there. But it might mean the scope and sequence might change a little bit than how we do currently, knowing that the curricular standards are exactly the same. What that will mean is us working with our new partners over the next several months and getting a lot of feedback from teachers, from other stakeholders about the middle school path to algebra. We have a commitment from Illustrative Math and from LearnZillion, it'll actually be in the contract, that we'll be working together to rework the scope and sequence to ensure that the 8th grade algebra course remains strong at MCPS.
I'm trying to think how will it play out in the classroom. So if I'm a teacher and I have kids that need that accelerated math, yet I'm implementing the curriculum for the rest of the...
So for next school year, any student who's taking accelerated math courses, whether it be elementary 4-5 math, 5-6 math, or the IM courses, applied IM, will continue to take the MCPS math courses for next school year until we have an opportunity to work with our vendors to determine how we can take their curriculum and compact it so that our students are able to take algebra by grade 8 or by 7 if necessary. So for next school year, everyone will be taking MCPS mathematics until we can get that acceleration pathway.
Okay, great, thank you. I have a lot more, but I'm sure my colleagues want to ask their questions too.
And we appreciate you. Ms. Wolf? Okay, Ms. Tataconda?
Yes, so I don't have any specific questions. I think I was going to ask some more about the accelerated math pathway, but thank you, Ms. Silvestre, for inquiring about that. I think I really appreciated in the math curriculum that concept of productive struggle. I think that's something that I've always observed as a student is if you spend the whole class period just standing up at the front of the room and doing 100 problems, for at least 50% of the students, that doesn't really do the trick in terms of getting them to understand. Because when we talk about these things, especially at the elementary school level, these are foundational concepts that if they don't get now, and especially at the elementary school level, how do these students really voice that they don't get it, then it's really going to impact their ability to achieve in math in the future. So I think I really appreciate that. I also love math, so it got me really thinking about how I have appreciated in the past personally and how I've heard that students appreciate their math teachers conducting in the classroom. And then I also wanted to just touch on this idea of interdisciplinary learning, engaging with global issues, learning how to be writers and communicators. I think that those are all really important in reminding us that we're trying to adopt a curriculum that doesn't just teach skills to teach them, but is really shaping our students to be contributors to our future. And I think that addressing those measures in this presentation and as we did the assessment and determination of the recommended vendor, I think is really important to remind us of that, to remind us that we want to think about how what we do here today is going to help students for future success. So thank you. Really happy with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dixon?
So I wanted to just share how excited I am about this English language arts curriculum. I think, you really are recommending a curriculum for the 21st century for our students. I spent a few hours with the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade English language curriculum, and I really wanted to go back to school. It really is that exciting. It's culturally responsive. You've got fiction, nonfiction, poetry, an emphasis on writing, the reading as well, and some peer review, and just really, I think it will develop the skills that our students need, but it will also make them well-educated people. And so I look through, the readings and pieces of readings, and I have a strong liberal arts education, and a lot of this was some stuff that I had read and newer stuff as well, in recent years. But so in there was Warriors Don't Cry, about the Little Rock Nine, The Story of My Life by Helen Keller. And these are also readings that I think will inspire students. So I'm not surprised at, the student comment about wishing that they had had that before. There's an article or a reading about the father of Chinese aviation, Island of the Blue Dolphins, which we've seen before, Dragon Wings, which is a Chinese story, I Never Had It Made, about Jackie Robinson, and 11 by Sandra Cisneros, and then Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. I mean, this is like a classic poem. Also, "Oh Captain, My Captain" by Walt Whitman. Some of these things I learned by heart. And then stories about Rosa Parks, and then Fallujah, about the Iraq War, yellow fever, and, all that went into eradicating that. And there's a reading, and I wasn't aware of this, that George Washington's great nephew wrote about him, so I'm anxious, to read that. So you have to send all these books to the board office so we can put them on the shelves there. But, and then students could go over to Mount Vernon as well, which is just down the street. What else was there? Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie, Barrio Boy, The Call of the Wild, and I think, and stories about the Holocaust as well, which I think is really, really very, very significant. A Night to Remember about the Titanic, Lord of the Flies. Edgar Allan Poe is, in again. There's a long article about him in this month's Smithsonian Magazine, so The Telltale Heart is there. And so is Anne Frank's diary, which I think are just classic pieces of literature, but also inspiring pieces of literature. And so I'm hoping that, we'll be invited to come to a class, when a teacher is teaching this. I just think it's really, really exciting, and I'm really very pleased to be able to vote to support this. And Nikki, I just think to your point, I think it is a good idea to get all of the materials packaged and ready to go, because what you're doing is you're saving teachers time, and that's the one thing that they say that they need more of. So this is inspiring and exciting. So thank you very much, and don't forget to give us those books, though.
An invitation to come.
Right.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon, for sharing with our community.
Yeah, following along with Ms. Dixon's comments, I was pleased to hear you were going to be purchasing everything is prepackaged as well. I know one of the strongest criticisms that I heard about our Curriculum 2.0 rollout was that they felt like they were just getting it kind of last minute, and we were putting it together as they were trying to teach it out, and that didn't work all that well from as near as I can tell. So, I too am really excited, and I don't want to be repetitive to my colleagues, but I'm really excited by the cross curriculum things that we've seen in this, and I mean, I hear over and over and over again from kids, if there isn't relevance, if they don't feel like there's relevance, they just don't, why should they care? And so I just think that that's so key. And again, my colleagues have mentioned so many different aspects of that, but I'm really excited to see that kind of stuff take place. Another thing that I frequently hear from teachers are concerns in creativity and instruction. Obviously we never want rigor to mean stiff or unbending. So I guess my only real question would be in terms of, what kind of room is there to make individual choices, for teachers to make individual choices to tailor the learning to meet the needs of their students and share in their own specializations or passions, expertise, as well as the students' specific passions and stuff like that, while keeping it aligned to the assessments that will make what they learn relevant to their achievement.
I think we can both say that both for mathematics and for the literacy product, there's clear direction around the standards that are to be taught. I think they do a great job of really giving them some explicit strategies for meeting the needs of students, particularly our second language learners, giving some recommendations for additional supports, and how to extend for those students who need that enrichment. And so I think there's a lot for teachers to use there. It's not just teach this lesson and only this lesson, but it does allow for flexibility for teachers to be able to be creative and use their own strategies and skills, but very specific around the objective through the standard.
That's great, and I was so appreciative of Ms. Dixon naming off several of those things. I mean, she's right that some of those are just classics that I think have maybe gotten a little lost over the years. I don't hear about them as much, but things that you take with you for forever. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. Ms. O'Neill?
No, sorry.
Certainly the English language arts is very inspiring, and what's old is new, and, an appropriate mix. That's why it's classic. Yes, I mean, for our diverse population, and also, we have long heard criticisms about writing, and, having it infused, is important, and I think the community needs to be aware that it is a component of the English language arts still, that writing is not dead. But Ms. Silvestri went off in the direction that I was going to go, and I think the only area that really gives me pause is that for our most highly able mathematics students, that, I understand, at least for this year, we're going to continue, but, I want to make sure that what is there that supports them, the trajectory hitting algebra by grade 8 isn't just starting, at 6th grade. It is all along the way in math. And I know that we've had our high school folks say, kids have not mastered the basics, the fundamentals of mathematics early on, that the kids get to middle school and high school with gaps. And so we need to make sure that doesn't happen. But, we have long had a goal of the majority of the kids achieving algebra by 8th grade, and certainly a fair number in 7th grade, and even some in 6th grade. In the compacted math, I think, it's been uneven across the district, and I think that's the only piece of the selection in the math that, and I know we're working, the contract calls to work with it, but I think that's where I have the most concern right now. It looks great, but I'm concerned about that trajectory to algebra by 8th grade, and I guess I have to have faith that, and it is in the contract, but that's a big worry.
Fair point, and just to again explain the current state, which is that students can enter middle school and take the Math 6 curriculum, the standard 6th grade curriculum, but then in 7th grade take a course that we call Investigations in Mathematics, known as IM, which is 7th and 8th grade in 1 year, to get to that trajectory of 8th grade algebra. That was a decision that was made a few years ago when the standards were first adopted, and this is probably a good time for us to look at that model and examine whether that's the best way to do it. Packaging 7th and 8th grade together in 1 year, or is there a better way to do it that spreads it out over longer, or align the scope and sequence in different ways? Even the math experts will tell us that there's this sort of handshake, they call it, that happens between 8th grade, which is pre-algebra, and Algebra 1. And so how we have opportunity, I think, and we're confident in working with these new partners to do it, to take a close look at how we've designed that pathway and what it might look like moving forward.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor the point, but the algebra by 8th grade ensures a trajectory to calculus, or should, by 12th grade. And, that standard, moving forward, it also has impacted kids in science, with the physics. And so, anyway, I just throw that out.
Thank you, Ms. O'Neill. Ms. Silvestri, did you have any more questions?
Just wanted to, really share how pleased I am that the ESOL curriculum is part of our curriculum, because I think it's long overdue. and I have high hopes and expectations for that, what that will do for the performance of our ESOL students. One, aligned with the online resources, one common complaint also from parents is, I can't help my child with their homework. And maybe it's a math issue or the way math is being taught now, but anything that we can do to empower our parents to be able to help our students with homework. It breaks my heart when you see that little child at home, I can't do this, they're crying, and the parent can't help either. So I'm very happy about the multilingual, the print copies as well. If we can have print copies in multiple languages as well, that's fantastic as well.
Thank you, and we do want to emphasize that in each of these 3 sets of materials, there will be a balance of digital and print and books coming home that give parents at least a glimpse into what happened in class today, as well as robust materials that come along during the year that explain what's being taught, that explains the types of experiences that students are having in class, that we think will be a real upgrade to what parents are experiencing now.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
Ms. O'Neill, I just wanted to respond because I think your point is well taken. As I've shared many times, and you've all heard me say this before, we moved from just over 5,000 students completing Algebra 1 in 2016 successfully, as Mr. Murphy identified, to a little over 8,000 last year, and we never want to go backwards. Not every student is going to complete Algebra 1 by the end of 8th grade, but every student can have a solid mathematical understanding as they move into high school and have the opportunities that are available to them and the opportunities that they want to choose. And so I share your concern, and we are absolutely committed to making sure that our students can be at the level they need and want to be, regardless of the grade level, because that's one of my complaints with the Common Core standards. In fact, having lived in Asia for most of the 90s, it just would not be acceptable in Asia to say that you're not going to take Algebra 1 until the 9th grade, because some students are ready for it, as we know, in the 6th grade, some in the 7th, some in the 8th. My son Peter was ready for it in the 10th grade, but that's okay. Peter's doing just fine in life. Everybody is where they are, but we need to give opportunity. So I just want to reassure you that I share your concern, and we will be paying very close attention to that math progression. We need more students learning math at higher levels at younger ages, not slowing down. And yet we don't want to push students who aren't ready for it, and it's very intentional and very individual if we do it right. The second thing I want to say is around, I'm thrilled at what I've been seeing over the last few months as we've had these conversations in my office, and the idea for our language learners, for our students who struggle with reading, especially decoding and fluency, the idea that we would begin as a system to regularly and consistently teach grade level texts with the appropriate intervention and scaffolding. And Ms. Hazel and Dr. Navarro and I have had many conversations about this, because when we teach students only at their current instructional level, they don't progress. I become a really good 2nd grade reader, even though I'm in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and somebody has to say to me, we're going to have you learning at the 3rd grade level by the end of 3rd grade. That's been one of the consistent comments that we have heard from the Latino community speakers that have come over the last several months, is the frustration that the students be taught at the grade level. And this curriculum and this team in front of you is committed to that. And we just won't have it any other way. It's moving students through the grade level so that they have all the opportunities that are available in this community and the school system. So I think it's a great move in the right direction for all of our children.
Thank you. So seeing no other lights, we'll let you continue with the presentation.
Okay, so we just want to spend a few minutes talking about implementation and professional development. As many of you have heard before, we did go out to schools last school year to ask who was ready to begin first year of implementation with curriculum. And schools talked with their staff, with their parent community. They looked at data to really determine where they wanted to start and if this was the right year. So we had schools contact us, and they were put into 2 cohorts. Cohort 1 will begin this spring, and then cohort 2 will begin a little later, and I'll share with you. We have 2 phases or 3 phases that we will take them through. So those schools that will start immediately will start in the spring, during the spring, and they will begin professional development, working with our vendors. Our vendors will also be working with some of our central office staff so that we can support our schools. All of our schools will receive digital access to the material, so even the schools that are not beginning right away will have digital access so that they can begin to see the resources and begin to study them. And then in the summertime, we'll begin the second phase. Again, with that first set of schools, cohort 1 schools, will begin the intensive professional development. And then in the fall, our cohort 1 schools will begin their actual full implementation of the new resource. Most of the schools in cohort 1 are either doing math or literacy, not both. We do have a few schools that are doing both, just because we have the new school, Clarksburg number 2. We have the Bayard Ruston is new this school year, so it made sense for them to just begin all of it at one time. But most schools will be starting with one content area, and then they will move to the second year. Our cohorts 2 schools will begin working with them next school year, but they won't begin their full implementation until the fall. And we do have posted online all of the schools for parents to see if their schools will be involved in cohort 1 or 2. So are the schools listed, and again, they can go online to study the list.
And it's all grades, right?
This is all grades, correct. Pre-K to 5 for math literacy here, and then in secondary, these are our cohort 1 schools. This is really just the first phase, was identifying our curriculum. Now we move into phase 2, which is really beginning the implementation. We are going to be meeting with over 40 folks on Thursday here in central office who are going to support us with the implementation of this curriculum, from the warehouse to professional development. We need to take a look at our parent portal. We need to take a look at grading and reporting, our evidence of learning, our assessments. We need to look at everything to make sure that it is well aligned and that we have the right communication messages, working with our communications team to make sure that we have everything that is needed for our parent community as well. So we're going to move into that phase, and then next month we will come back to you to discuss elementary literacy. All right, so just want to share one last thing about communication. I know I heard it from our parents. We want to make sure that all of our parents are really familiar with where we are headed. We want to make sure all of our parents know what cohort their school is in. And so we will continue to engage parents through the letters and online surveys. We will have curriculum nights that we will work with our parent engagement office to do, and also with our schools. Our vendors have also offered to talk with our parents about the philosophy of the curriculum. And then we're really excited about the fact that we actually have books that students will be able to take home, and parents can review and make sense of at home with their children. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ms. Dixon, go ahead.
So the big question, how much is this all going to cost us?
So you do see dollar signs in your resolution, but I wanted to unpack that a little bit because as we've worked on contracts with each one of these publishers, there are some nuances. For example, elementary school has 5 grade levels, 6 grade levels if you count kindergarten. Middle school only has 3. In literacy, we're talking about all students, whereas in math at middle school, We still have the algebra and geometry thing to figure out, so it's not necessarily all students yet. So the pricing structure can be confusing when you start to study it, but the bottom line is that the Eureka Math materials come to around $39 per student, and the LearnZillion and StudySync around $30 per student. When we look at a 3-year progression of rolling these in and analyzing what they would cost, those are the per student numbers to give you an idea.
Per student per year? Yeah. Scott,
Yes, per student
just
per
tell
year.
us the millions. Yeah. I mean, you told me the other day, but I just wanted people to know, about, yeah. Just about.
Okay, so you'll see in the resolution, and this is posted on board docs on the MCPS website, that the year one cost for Great Minds, which is Eureka, is just over 1.1 million. McGraw-Hill Education for year one that is StudySync, just over 700,000, and LearnZillion, which is illustrative mathematics, is just over 309,000, and just over 300,000. When we divide that up, that gives you the per student cost that I just mentioned of around $30 for the middle school product and just under $40 for the elementary materials.
Right. And so I'm curious as well, the vendors, are they happy to be working with us?
That's a great question, and let's just acknowledge them for a second, because you can see the rigorous process that they went through, and have each of them voiced a real excitement and commitment to working with us, not as vendors, but as partners.
Good.
And we think that's going to be the case.
I appreciate that. I think gratitude is very important. It's an important piece in life.
So Ms. Tadakanda, and then I'm gonna go back in order, how we were, be consistent. Go ahead.
We can go
You can
in
wait?
order.
Okay.
Yeah, I
So
can wait.
let's just go ahead and, Dr. Daka, do you have any questions? Ms. Silvestri?
So I guess I'm concerned about, not concerned, just the ease of use of the materials. If I am a teacher, what does that look like? How do I access the curriculum? And to the question that was posed in the testimony, the different populations, right? So the supports for ESOL, the supports for accelerated learning, the supports for special education. How easy is it to get to that information for a teacher so that they can differentiate their teaching based on this array of learning styles that they have in their classroom? I know you will cover that in the training, but I wanted to hear more about that now.
So just a couple things to point out, and then Mrs. Hazel can jump in. First of all, going back to those external ratings that I talked about, one of which is conducted by Ed Reports. The Ed Reports ratings, all of these materials were rated very, very highly by Ed Reports. And one of the 3 categories is actually usability, where they measure the usability for teachers. How easy it is to not only get your hands on planning tomorrow's lesson, but adapting the lesson in the moment for students who may need something different. Each of these were rated very highly in that area. We also, in the materials, you'll see very explicit guidance for the teachers in ways that we've never really been able to do with our previous curricula. We might, if we go back to March when we heard findings of the external review, one of the things we heard that day was how much time teachers were spending going to various resources or just various different places in our materials to click to find the right thing that they needed for that group of students. With these prepackaged materials that have been used elsewhere and fine-tuned and are constantly refined, constantly updated, we think it's going to be a completely different experience for teachers in terms of ease of use.
The other thing we did hear from the districts that we spoke to for all of the instructional materials is the importance of the professional development. So we don't want to deceive anyone in thinking that just because we hand you a package that it's all of a sudden going to work miracles. We really need to take the time to provide the professional development. Teachers, we've embedded time for them to study the philosophy, understand how it's laid out, working with them, the vendors, for that face-to-face training so that they can really understand the math, the concepts, and also how to deliver that to students who have a variety of learning needs. So that'll be a huge component of the professional development that we'll be providing. And even for our schools that are waiting, they're not necessarily implementing in year one, we are already working with them now on some of those changes that our teachers need to make in terms of the shift in philosophy. So the professional development is going to be really critical to the work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wolf?
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the challenges of implementing a new curriculum in the middle of the school year.
So part of what we wanted an opportunity to do was actually to get an early start. And think about, because one of the lessons learned from how we did curriculum rollout last time was that the summer alone is not the only time that people need support. The fact that a lot of materials and a lot of information is now digitally available to all teachers. We also heard when we met with our teacher groups, part of what they also wanted, and the reason why we actually made all materials available to all teachers, is they wanted to be able to peruse themselves and do some studying for themselves, so that while there is district professional development that will start gearing teachers up as we are closing this school year down for next school year's implementation. What we also know is that our teachers are extremely resourceful, and sometimes, like students, they want to read ahead and they want to have conversations. So we are actually anticipating I am anticipating that our teachers actually from cohort 2 will begin asking us a whole bunch of questions that we need to write into a tight timeline that you guys are all putting together, think that only is going to deal with cohort 1. When you give access and information, they're going to become students of it and ask questions as well. Part of what we're trying to do this coming semester is be able to balance the fact that people are going to be closing out an academic year, and try to still bring forward pieces of information that begin to provide an introduction to the new curriculum, so they don't feel overwhelmed that just a couple of times during the summer was the first time they ever saw it, and then they have to get ready for full implementation in the fall. And that suggestion came about from the teams that we put together from school level people. Both principals and teachers said, give us as much as an early head start getting ready. The summer alone is not an early head start for us to get ready for that.
Okay. That's one of the things I was concerned about, the teachers feeling overwhelmed. But you also talked about establishing a parent portal. Now, what are we going to do for the parents that don't have digital access?
So the great thing about all of these materials is that they have both digital and print. Mm-hmm. And so for families that don't have access to online materials, we will be able to print them and send them home with the students.
Okay.
I'm sorry, if I could also weigh in. One of the things that I think, you mentioned that our vendors are very excited to become partner with us. Mm-hmm. Part of what I want to challenge our partnership with is this is not just the role of the Office of Curriculum and Instructions to get this right in terms of rolling out. The Office of Parent Community Engagement, part of the work that we're going to be doing is how do we, if we have parents that because of language issues or maybe technology issues or other things still want to support their kids at home, how do we do that? And I'll be frank, I think the materials that we have right now are great, and they're going home to parents. Some of them are designed for parents. I want to take a look also with the lens of the various parent community groups that we support to see how we support some of that and maybe evolve the parent resources, not just in media and language, but accessibility. And specifically in areas like mathematics, where we see lots of parents coming and talking about it. So I hope that our partnership also is a partnership where we're not just consuming the great materials that they've put together, but that we also contribute to how this district and other districts are continuously giving feedback about the needs of our families and our students in how to access and support their kids at home.
Well, that's great for my next question. You talked about having parent nights. What concerns me is that you have parent nights in locations that my parents can't get to. And so I would hope that when you're planning those, that you would plan them all around the county. Because I looked at some of the materials on something else, and it really goes to some of the things I want to talk to you about. And all of the events are Rockville, Gaithersburg, nowhere in East County. So if you're having parent nights, I want you to think about the fact that that should be all parents. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. And thank you for your patience, Ms. Tataconda.
No worries. So I just had one question. So this really builds on some of the concerns Ms. Silvestre and Ms. Wolf just expressed just now. So we have platforms to support parents with different levels of resource access at home. But what are we gonna do in schools? Because I think just looking at this presentation today, parent engagement has been especially emphasized, but I think we have a pretty decent student population where students come from households where we have all of these supports in place, but their guardian or parent isn't necessarily going to be able to be involved in their engagement with this curriculum. So this is kind of more of a systemic question, and it doesn't necessarily relate to this curriculum particularly. It asks of us as a system, what are we doing for those students to, provide them with that piece that brings it full circle that they may not have at home. I don't know if my question makes sense, but
Yeah, your question is a systemic question, and I think Dr. Statham and myself constantly know that schools deal with that right now. We teach students that walk through the door every single day of our schools, and there is variability of their supports at home, and we develop different ways of engaging students and ways of supporting their learning as we think about during the school day, opportunities for after school, but really making that instruction in the school day very meaningful. And I think that's part of one aspect of it is clearly having really strong instructional materials that think about opportunities for students, different ways of engaging students. The other one is the professional development, and that it's the work that we constantly are engaged in schools that, our responsibility is to teach every single child that walks through the door.
And I would just add that we also want to be very careful not to make assumptions about the support that students do or don't have at home. It may look different, but I think to Ms. Wolf's point, we have to be more thoughtful about how we engage, where we engage parents, so that they have exposure to the direction that we're going, curriculum-wise, instruction-wise. So I'm always careful about making assumptions.
Absolutely. And I think really to my point is that when parent engagement is such a key piece and it's so beneficial to students as they engage with their education, I guess what I really value and I hope as a system we can address is making sure that for students who don't have that piece at home, they're still able to achieve and have a positive academic experience. So.
Thank you. Ms. Dixon, do you have any? Okay. Ms. Mondrowski.
I just sort of have one quick question because everyone's pretty much addressed everything. But as we were talking about supports that would be available for, like our special education students, our second language learners, it was mentioned today about dyslexia. How does several people in their testimony had mentioned benchmark. How do these resources compare or strongly support over some of the others that may have been presented for addressing different areas of?
So I'll just start by saying we've taken a little bit longer time for elementary literacy, part of it is the complexity of a larger shift that we'll talk about being more explicit in our instruction of reading, supported not just in the early grades, especially in the early grades, but throughout, and especially, I think, many times that we explicitly address it in those upper elementary grades before students transition to middle school. And I think Ms. Hazel can talk a little bit about the components that we look at. But I just want to emphasize Mr. Murphy's fundamental shift, at least when it came to language learners, and Dr. Smith's point about everybody having access to grade level content. And then supporting students who have to build up to that grade level standard, and having those explicitly, but the non-negotiable is the grade level access to content, which I think is extremely important. And so there you see the differentiation of materials, but we could talk a little bit about, why these rose up ultimately to the top with key aspects of it.
We've been working very closely with Kevin Lowndes in the Special Education Department. We've participated in several of the meetings with parents who are representing dyslexia concerns, and they shared with us some of the look-fors that they would like to see in a literacy curriculum, particularly at the primary level. And so we certainly included a lot of that language in our request for proposal. We invited many of the representatives to our vendor presentations, and then we also had Mr. Lowndes and his team take a second look at the products that made it to the final presentation to really make sure that the needs were being addressed. And so when we come back next month, we'll actually speak to that and the recommendation.
Okay, great, thank you.
Ms. O'Neill?
Yes, so following up on Ms. Dixon's questions about the cost, the dollars and cents, I just wanted to point out that originally, we started on this path last spring, and it was, if I'm not correct, the money was included in the last fiscal year to purchase the new curriculum. And when we delayed going forward and restarted the process, we had notified the council that it was shifting to this year. How much was that total amount that we had deferred? Was it 6.5 million? Or
6 million.
6 million. So that money is already included in this fiscal year's budget, correct?
Yes, it is, and I don't know if Ms. Diamond is somewhere in the, coming back up. Checking my numbers on it. She just walked in. Yes, but it is included in here, and I think the full costs for implementation, and remember, our implementation guidelines have both implications for cohort 1 and cohort 2 schools this coming year. And we can, and we feel confident that we have the resources available to be able to have the curriculum materials for the schools in this year 1 coming forward as well.
It's a good thing I watch.
I wanted folks to understand that we had already anticipated this cost. I mean, it had been included in last year's budget. We had notified the council that, and we were moving it to, or delaying it to this year. So this is not a supplemental request. This was a pre-planned expenditure. Correct.
So that's correct. There are a couple components. One is how much money is in the current budget. And we also have money that sits in our fund balance, which was money that was in last year's budget that we had originally planned to use, and we did not use in June because we had made a decision to extend the work in the selection. If you recall from kind of the way the law works regarding MCPS fund balance. So once money has been appropriated to the school system, it cannot be used for any other purpose. However, if it's in our fund balance, the only way it can be used for us is for it to be appropriated to us. So if we do need to go back and use money beyond what has already been authorized and appropriated in the FY19 budget, meaning part of that fund balance, then we would go back to the county government and ask for some of those funds to utilize. But yes, we've been very planful. We've been carefully working both with legal counsel and my office to look at the expenses related to year 1, year 2, year 3, and those years beyond. So we are ready for those expenses.
Okay.
Real quick question.
Is that it? Ms. O'Neill?
Well, no, I mean, ultimately, at the end, we need someone, I was gonna move the resolution for adoption of the new curriculum.
Second.
Okay.
I do have one.
So go ahead. What's your
Just
question?
in reference to what Ms. Diamond was just mentioned in year 1, year 2, year 3, and so on, just for clarification, by year 3, so 2022, will be completely done, and we're only doing math and English, is that?
So that's a great question, and it's important to look at. While the expenses are around work that's going on in those years, year 1 and year 2 will be covered in this year's expense because we need to start some of the work for both year 1 and year 2 in the next 6 months. And so we've planned accordingly. So there are phase-in dollars that we're going to spend as we phase in and provide professional development, as well as the purchasing of all those materials. Now, when you ask the question, are we done? We are done the phasing in. That does not mean we do not pay or need to continue paying. So there's maintenance, and so we do need to continue to pay for the materials, and we're working through that as part of the contract as well, because you never want to have an escalator that, you know, once they've gotten you on board and all of a sudden the prices go up
Right.
because you're there. And so we've worked through that with all the companies.
Okay, good, okay, thank you.
So seeing no lights, it's been moved and seconded. If we're all in favor to adopt the curriculum with the instructional materials? Okay, and that's unanimous. So thank you.
Ms. Evans, may I make a
Thank you.
statement?
Sure, absolutely.
I just
Go ahead,
would like
Dr.
to thank all of the individuals in this room and all of the hundreds and hundreds of people that you represent, because I think this is a terrific next step in ensuring that we really, truly reach every single student. So I cannot thank you enough for all that you have done to make this possible and to move forward on behalf of all of our students. And one last comment to you guys, Ms. Tataconda, you made me think about something. One of the things that we should embed in all of this is the most effective research around homework, because homework is abused all the time. Homework is for exposure and it's for reinforcement. It's not for the original creation of learning. And when you're talking especially in the areas of literacy and mathematics, cognitive processes that you learn and often learn best in a group rather than, so let's really make sure that we emphasize through all of our professional learning the use and misuse of homework, because it really goes to your question exactly. Yeah. Whether my mother is there or my father is there 8 hours every night or not at all, if I'm dependent on my parent to learn this material entirely, then MCPS has not done its job. And I feel you just made me like go boing. So let's make sure that's embedded all the way through as we think about all the learning. It's a chance to kind of reset in those two areas of mathematics, which then will affect every other content area. So thank you, Ms. Tataconda, for that.
Yeah. So thank you. So at this time, the board will take a recess and we will reconvene at 3:45.